right, good Monday morning. Here we are, Monday Morning Pastor, following a great day yesterday of celebrating 60 years of Eastview Christian Church.
Yeah.
So we're kind of tired, but it was an awesome day. It was a really cool day.
I wasn't even going to start there, Mike, but let's start with the 60th anniversary,
Yeah.
since that gave context to the sermon. You were in Psalm 27,
Right.
third installment of our Asking God series. You called it Show Us.
Mm-hmm.
What did the special occasion do to you as a preacher?
Well, you know, anything that you add, I always tell people all the time, if your only job is to preach on Sunday, it makes it a lot easier because you can just focus on, I'm going to open the Word. But again, I think this is so important, especially for young guys who are preaching. The context is always king, right? The context always, so it's true with the Scripture.
Yes.
It's also true with the context of your preaching and who you're preaching to. So certainly it influences. So there are a couple of times in the sermon that you go, okay, let's think of this in consideration of our 60th anniversary and God's presence being with us and stuff. So it's good, distracting sometimes, tiring because, I talked a lot more than I normally do yesterday, but a great day in the Lord. Loved it.
Mike, I'm going to do what we never do. I'm going to read the focusing part of Psalm 27, then I just want to let you talk about it.
Okay.
You locked in particularly on verse 4,
Yep.
Psalm 27. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. So, let's start with what you told me before you even preached on Sunday. You were tempted to really create what I would call a one-movement sermon.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it was a one movement. I was tempted because, like Wednesday at noon is our deadline to get the outline in for the e-news,
Yeah.
our bulletin we call it. And I was super tempted at one point just to put in big letters one thing. And just let that drive. And so it did kind of drive
It did.
where we went with
It
the whole thing. I had some points and some bullet points, but mostly it was like, what is your one thing? Because I think if you can narrow down your walk with the Lord to the one thing, which is to be in the Lord's presence,
Yeah.
if you can narrow it down to that one thing, then everything else comes with a bit more clarity and direction.
Okay. That's exactly what I want to talk about,
yeah.
Mike. I want to put preaching and the presence of God side by side. In some ways, all preaching is about practicing the presence of God.
Yeah.
But let's talk
Yeah.
about the seek language that you
Yep.
explored yesterday. I'm just going to give you a chance to readdress it.
Well, again, I think it's just a matter of, and we do this in preaching. It's really interesting. In preaching, what you're trying to do when you're in the Word, you're going, God, where are you at in this? What is it that you want me to see here about you and
Right.
about us?
Right.
And then you're seeking, when you're preaching it, you're actually seeking, how's the Spirit moving in here? And what is happening in this live moment spiritually here? And so God, show me so that I can help show us what we need to hear from today. So this idea of seeking after God is something I think people don't do enough, which is this really intense looking for and searching for something that maybe in our culture particularly, in our conservative Christian culture, we think it's a little bit too mystical or too weird to say I'm looking for the face of God. I'm
Right.
seeking the presence of Christ.
Right.
But it's undeniable that His presence lives within us. So it shouldn't be a weird thing to go, I want to be in the presence of God. I don't want to seek that. And when you get in the presence of God, then that changes everything, obviously.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that at the end, Mike. You did something that's typical Mike Baker. You illustrated a really significant part of the sermon, the seeking part, that one
Yeah.
thing, by going back to the New Testament and looking at the story of Mary and Martha. I want
Yeah,
you to talk a
yeah,
little bit more
yeah.
about that, okay?
What is thought? It's so. I had the epidemic actually in my life, in the life of Christians that I know, in pastors, in churches, to get so wrapped up in doing things for Christ, in the name of
Right.
Christ, and about Christ, that you miss Christ, right?
Well-intentioned.
And so, well-intentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, Martha was working her very hardest in
Yeah.
Luke 10 to make a good meal for Jesus and his apostles. And Jesus appreciated it, I'm sure, right? But when she started bellyaching about Mary, her sister, not doing anything, then Jesus just said, you know what? Mary has chosen the one thing that's better. And so it's a message for us to go, Jesus would rather have us sit at his feet and listen to him in his presence than to do a bunch of stuff for him. And that's certainly a challenge for pastors who are always wanting to do something big for God and have it count for something. So again, I'm even reminded this week, just be in my presence is what the Lord's speaking to us,
I want to come back to that too, Mike. Your structure, again, was very tight, like it always is. You gave us what I would call byproducts of being in God's presence. I'm not afraid, first. Second, my heart is home. And third, I can believe what lies ahead. Again, I wanted to give you a chance before we come to the end to talk about that, because I really want to address the issue of our being God's one thing. I want to come back to that.
Okay. I think, let me just hit on that last part there about not being afraid of the future. That I think that would be one of the things that most of us are challenged with.
Right.
Whether you've got kids, you worry about how they're going to grow up, where they're going to be. You got health issues. How's this going to turn out when you get a diagnosis you don't like? You got financial things that come up, and you go, I wonder what it's going to be like in the future. Most of us, and I think Jesus would, concur with this in his teaching, the idea of worry has to do with the future. And if we find ourselves in the presence of God, then the future, we can trust in it. We can know that we'll see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, right?
Yeah.
As he says in the Psalm. And so we know that in his presence, that's a good place to be when it comes to the future. I can believe good for the future. And so I think that's a good thing for us to hear on Monday morning particularly.
Well, and a beautiful, wonderful recapping, I think, Mike. I loved what you did at the end of the sermon.
Yeah,
where you flipped it upside down. You went to John 14.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let you do that again and give us a word of encouragement.
No, it's just a great, when you do a sermon, and again, those of you who write sermons or those of you who are sermon nerds like me and you, you just start throwing you look up all kinds of scriptures that say show us or one thing or all these different searchings. And the word seek is a study, and the word, one thing is a study, and you go all over the scripture, you write a million things down, and then you just start looking at all these pieces on 4 or 5 sheets of paper. I have whiteboard and white Post-it notes everywhere. And then you go, and it just hit me at the end as I'm trying to conclude the sermon. There's Philip in John 14 saying to Jesus, show us the Father.
Right.
Just show us the Father. And again, they've been in the presence of Jesus. Jesus had to say, Philip, don't you know me?
Yeah.
I'm here. This is me. But I thought it was a good way to go to show people that, like 2,000 years ago, a follower as close to Jesus as Philip was going, show me the Father.
Yes.
And that's a good prayer for us to go into this whole week and the rest of our life. Show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. God bless you all. Have a great Monday.